But welcome to the Meadows Museum of Art. My name is Alyssa Klaus, and I'm the director of the Meadows. If you are a centenary student and you need passport points, be sure to sign in at the front desk before you leave tonight. Tonight's speaker is Terry Konrath, an advocate of the slow movement, a cultural philosophy rooted in the idea that quality, tradition, and meaningful human connections should take precedence over speed and mass production. Konrath's approach to photography follows these same principles. Her photographs expertly capture the variety of cultural traditions unique to the state of Louisiana. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge the contributions to this exhibition's production and tonight's artist talk made by the Ross Lynn Charitable Foundation in Ruston, Louisiana. Terry Konrath served as their 2001 Artist in Residence, so thank you for all of your help and support. I also want to shout out to Chef Pardette Harris in the back and Chef Gabriel Balderas for providing the food. If you haven't gotten a chance to taste them yet, please do. They are very delicious. Visual Gumbo will be on display through December 2nd, and please join me in welcoming Terry Konrath.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about my love of photography and how I got started. I received my first camera. Can you guys hear me? Is that okay? Okay. So for my graduation high school present, my dad got me a camera. And that kind of just set my way to becoming a documentary photographer. I used that same camera for probably 20 years as I traveled around, and I dropped it maybe 7 times, and that camera kept working. Finally, I busted the lens on it, and finally I had to replace it, but I replaced it with the same type of camera, which you can still buy today for like around $100. I still use film, and I don't use flash. I'm just really nuts and bolts when I'm photographing people. And I use basically, I prefer to use a high-speed film because it gives me a versatility with the light, with available light, because I'm not using a flash, which means I can photograph both indoors and outdoors with ease. A lot of people maybe aren't so attracted to the visual texture of those images. You can see some of these images have a lot of grain in them, meaning they look a little like stippled, like a drawing almost, if you look really close. For me, I'm really attracted to that visual look. So it lends itself to kind of a modern, kind of a vintage look in my opinion, so which I enjoy. I've been photographing Louisiana since the 80s, and some of those images are over here. I started photographing friends and family because that was what was available to me, and I had taken a photo history class, and I was introduced to some photographers that really kind of bled my vision. And those people, there are some people like Larry Clark and Danny Lyon. They were photographing in the late 70s or late 60s and early 70s. And they were photographing their friends and people they were hanging out with. And they were just kind of normal people. Danny Lyon did a book called The Bike Riders, and he hung out with this motorcycle club, and they were just kind of just people, that maybe you would see at a bar or something. But what I was enthralled with was the fact that, I didn't have to go to Morocco or someplace extravagant or exotic to me to make art. And so those images stayed with me, and I remember thinking, well, I can make art by photographing, my experience, basically. I also became really enamored with the FSA photographers from the Farm Security Administration. During the, I think around 1935, Roosevelt had come up with a program to get people back to work. And the Farm Security Administration was actually trying to help farmers whose farms had collapsed from the Dust Bowl, which everybody's familiar with. And a lot of that, the cause of that was weather related. There was too much, we were having heat waves back then, and they were also doing poor land management, like they weren't rotating crops, so the land was not, first of all, it was cleared really aggressively, and also they kept planting the same thing over and over, so they weren't getting any kind of downtime for the soil to replenish, basically. So anyways, everybody knows what happened there. People from Oklahoma started migrating out to California. There was a huge collapse of farms. Everything went, I'm sure people have seen pictures of the Dust Bowl. So there was a group of photographers that got hired to photograph for the government. And there's a woman named Dorothea Lange, who I was particularly in love with her images. She has a really famous image of a migrant mother who's holding her children. And that image, and she has a few others of that same scenario, where they were actually in a migrant camp, and that woman had just sold the tires off of her car to feed her kids. There's another photographer that also really captured my heart, and his name is Gordon Parks, and he was also one of those FSA photographers. He ended up to be the first African-American photographer for Life magazine, and he did a really famous photo of a woman. She looks like she's a cleaner. She's holding a mop in her hand and a broom in her other hand, and there's a American flag behind her. And he called that American Gothic. And that image was kind of taken after a famous painting called American Gothic, which I don't know if anybody has seen that, where there's a farmer and his wife, right? Interestingly enough, one of my images from my farm photo series, I call them my beautiful American Gothic couple. And that's Raccoon Den up there on the top of that series over there. Yeah. And they were just lovely, and they're organic farmers, and they use heirloom seeds. And they were some of the people that I met on my artist residency with the Rosslyn Foundation. I spent 3 weeks, and then I hung out for longer, and I kept photographing, and I connected with so many amazing farmers in the area. The beekeepers are from Farmersville. Sandy from Dixie Farms is from Dixie, and she has a lavender farm, and they she grows her own organic lavender, and she makes amazing shortbread and tea and lotion, I think, and all kinds of cool stuff. And I also went on to photograph chefs in the region, old school people who I knew from when I lived here when I was in high school back in the day. And I was really happy to see that those restaurants had survived after all these years. So I included some of those people. And then I also included Hardette and Gabriel, because they're like the new introduction to the gumbo pot that are adding new spice to the fair here, which is really exciting. So even though Hardette has a long-standing history in the community, I know Hardette's, your grandparents had a store next to?
My grandfather had a liquor store, diner, and lounge a few blocks away from my kitchen.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So she has a deep-rooted history here in this town too. So, anyways, so my whole thing is I really, I feel like this is my love letter to Louisiana. I've continued to photograph, I guess a very long time now, as I've come back and forth between here and California. These are a collection of prints. I probably have maybe 100 more images that are in storage that need to be printed, that I'm going to try to get more funding for as I'm going along, and I will continue to photograph. The great culture here. It's I was an Air Force brat, and that's how I ended up in Bossier. And I was, I've been lucky enough to have gotten to travel everywhere. But I can tell you that Louisiana has the most interesting culture from like most places I've ever been, and it's always drawn me to come back here. There were some other photographers.
And you live in New Orleans, not in California.
Well, I'm back and forth still, so yeah, for the next year or so. So I have some projects I have to go back there to deal with, which are good. So I had another photo exhibit that I did in May and June back there. So anyways, I also wanted to mention a few other photographers that I forgot about that made an impression on me, which was August Sonder, who was photographing like the 1918 to like the mid 1930s. And what I liked about him so much was he had very much inspired me in this idea of trying to record every aspect of culture. And what he did is he set out to do kind of like a encyclopedia of like every kind of person that makes up German society during that time. So he did pictures of soldiers, circus performers, farmers, bricklayers, everything, anybody he thought was interesting, and he compiled this very large volume of work. What I responded to about his work was, you can see a lot of the way that I photograph people is very frontal, and it's very direct, and people are staring at me and they're engaging. And I feel like that, when you get to view the images, it makes you feel closer and more responsive to the person being photographed also. A lot of his photos were like that, and I remember thinking that was a way that I really wanted to express my connection with people. Because I'm using such a slow manner in photographing, I end up hanging out with people usually for a couple hours. And we get in these great conversations, and people have told me really very private, amazing stories about how their lives have unfolded that I don't think that I would be privy to without my camera. And I think it's, for me, being a photographer has been such a beautiful, amazing experience that I feel so blessed to have people welcome me into their lives. It's been quite amazing how many wonderful people I've met. I mean, I've just been blown away at people's hospitality. So, anyways, with that being said, I did want to mention something about the idea of the slow photography movement, which, as Alyssa said, grew out of the slow food movement. What happened is in the 80s in Italy, a fast food restaurant tried to open up near the Spanish Steps, which is, if anybody's been there, it's like a place where everybody goes, hangs out. So it's where the tourists go. And a guy named Carlo Petrini said, hold on, we're not doing that here. And the reason being is because it would have really affected Italian restaurateurs and economically and socially, in the sense that their restaurateurs are generationally run, long-term generationally run small establishments in general. They don't have chain food restaurants like we do here. So it would have economically really devastated if like a ton of American fast food chains came in there. It would have made a big difference. And so they started this movement, which eventually grew to, include other things about the way you source food, which meant the farmers wanted to grow organic. People wanted to make sure that their vegetables were sourced locally. The reason for doing that is because if you ship things very far away, then you're incurring and using fuel costs, right? So that's bad for the environment in that sense. People eat seasonally, so that therefore you don't have to ship things. They also practice good land management issues, which is obviously good for all of us because then we can keep growing things. And then so out of that theory of trying to slow down, not eat food that's been packaged, and continue this culture of traditional, using traditional ingredients and traditional ways of cooking, it kind of spread to this idea that people in the arts and in the clothing manufacturing wanted things to be kept more traditional. And for those, it included not only the reason of being environmentally responsible, but also keeping cultural heritage intact. So there's a really heavy tradition of craftsmanship, like shoemakers or people making handmade bags there still, and handmade furniture, things like that. There's still a heavy culture of people still doing things the way that they did in the Renaissance, basically. It also kind of spread to the West, where we know it as, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the fast fashion kind of stuff. So part of the slow movement idea started to move into that, and the idea of slowing down, supporting local people who are sewing things or making things in small quantities instead of really cheap t-shirts or whatever being shipped very far, that don't last that long because the materials they're using are not sustainable, may not be very good, so they wear down quicker, and then you end up with more garbage. When I started to learn more about this, I learned about this fact that every one of us comes up with 83 pounds of fabric waste a year, and I think only like 1% of that gets recycled, because we don't have the technology to recycle the stuff that's plastic or polyester, and people are feeling like it's too expensive now to do that. So to offset that, the idea of making things that are going to last longer, that you'll wear longer, is an answer to that. I also have a friend in California that's an architect, and there's a movement in the architectural world where she just worked on a public parking structure, and they made the ceilings higher because they potentially think in 20 years that parking structure is going to be reused as housing. So they've taken the substructure and built it as such that instead of coming in and having to tear down the building and start from the ground up, they are having the foresight to think of basically generally like we're not going to create more trash, and we're getting what we built this building out of a longer life, and we're going to be able to change it and manipulate it the way that we build it later as we modernize or as we change, our needs change as a society. So overall, it's been an interesting philosophy that I've come to really, feel proud to be part of. I have to say, there's no committee or something where you go join or something. It's kind of just a bunch of people with this idea of doing the best that you can, in your own space to make things better. And I do believe, we're all faced with such craziness right now on so many levels that I do think that all of us making small changes, even if they're small in our lives, collectively, all of us doing small things can make a huge difference. I'm a true believer in that. So, yeah. So anyway, I think I kind of covered what I wanted to cover, and then I was going to take questions from you guys. If anybody had any questions for me, yeah.
Well, I came to the exhibit preview when new exhibits were put up, and was so surprised to see your reference to slow food, because we have a slow food chapter here in our minute. But so yes, you can join our chapter.
Okay, there you go. I didn't know.
But,
there you go.
But no, I was really excited.
I love it.
To know that you didn't live here, and so I was like, how have I not met her yet? And it was thrilling to then continue around the room and see all my friends back here on the wall. So I was curious to know how you also you explain the origin of slow food beautifully, and I'm usually the one that has to do that.
Oh, good. Thank you. I'm nervous, as you can tell. So.
But I was curious to know how you were introduced to slow food.
Well, personally, I have some chronic health issues, and that went on for years. It took me 2 years to get diagnosed. I was very, 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 very sick. And then I realized that I had to kind of be my own advocate for my health. And part of that, because I had such a hard time getting diagnosed, I was really disappointed with Western medicine, even though, I follow it. Like, I had to be on a bunch of antibiotics. I had contracted Lyme disease years ago, to the point where it still affects me, and, I've like crazy neurological stuff that happens a lot. So I was really disappointed with some of the Western stuff. I went on these antibiotics, and I'm very grateful that they exist. But I did realize, like, my part in all this is, like, I have to eat better to maintain my health and deal with this kind of stuff, and just to make my life easier. And I noticed that I felt like in California I was privy. It's very easy for me to get organic stuff since the 80s. Because I don't know if you guys know, but California provides like a third of the agricultural vegetables and stuff for the whole country. So it is a big deal that California's running out of water. It's huge. But in the early 80s and in the 90s, it was so easy for me to get organic. And of course, it's grown there, so it's not as expensive as here. And I did feel different. I felt like not having any of that extra stuff didn't make me as symptomatic at times, because I would cluster where I'd go through a couple weeks where I'd have a really hard time. So me taking charge of like what I was going to put into my body introduced me to the slow food movement. And then I came back and did the Ross Lynn Foundation Artist Residency, because their call actually was about coming and photographing farmers in the region who are using sustainable methods. And I thought, this is amazing, because part of me having a hard time coming back at times was I was nervous I wouldn't be able to get the kind of food that I knew made me feel better. Because, you know, I love fried food. I love all the fun stuff here. Let's face it, it's a blast. But I can't eat that way all the time. So you know, Ross Lynn and Jane and the guys brought me back here, and that I met all these people, and I just, you know, was so happy. I feel so proud to give such a small group of people who are really fighting an uphill battle in many ways. Because listen, if you're back east or you know, in other parts of the country, I don't think the terrain is as crazy here. It's like a jungle here you have to fight with too, you know. So I'm blown away when people figure out ways to use plants as natural pest control. I know some people are planting corn stalks, and they're planting marigolds around the bottom because marigolds fend off a kind of bug that the corn stalks don't like, or that the bugs like the corn stalks. So, you know, there's all these systems too, like the permaculture system that I learned about, things that I just don't really know, I didn't know about at all. So that's how I got introduced to it.
Well, I was curious, everyone that joins comes to us for different reasons, so I just always like to know what.
Yeah, and then it just resonated with me too, you know, as I started reading, because I feel like I'm a culture bearer, and I'm trying to protect culture by archiving it with my photos, it makes sense to me, to who I am, you know?
Well, if people want to know how to find local foods, like Food North Louisiana, we have a website.
Yay.
You can see a list of local farms and places that carry local products.
Thank you, definitely, yeah. Okay, hi.
Hi, I'm more interested in your artist journey. Like, when did you, felt like you made it professionally, and do you do any other mediums? And kind of what made you know, like, photography is it for me as a career?
Well, because I have to make a living, I've always done these weird art jobs, and because I was in LA for a really long time, the opportunities were there for me. Like I did a lot of gig work where I'd go get hired to do henna tattoos for like Levi's at a concert. I worked in a bar where I did henna tattoos where you could get a drink and a ticket to get a tattoo for me for $10, and you could get a manicure. And I would have people out the door all night long drawing fake tattoos on people. And I also would get people from the bar that would hire me to do illustrations for them for, you know, their logo or whatever. So for a long time, for the majority of my career, I've always been an illustrator, really, per se. And then eventually I started teaching. I taught college for about 5.5 years. And then I started to want to get, teaching, if anybody's taught you, it takes up all your time. It really is and for me, I just never had time to do my work again. And so I took a break from that, and then I started to think more that I wanted to get into public funding, sponsored projects, and art residencies, contests, grants. So that's what I've been focusing on for the last, 3-4 years or so. I've done the Rosslyn residency. I've done, before I came out there, I went to North Carolina and I did a public mural with fabric, with waste fabric. So I made a mural basically out of trash, but it was fabric. And then right now I have an exhibit in Los Angeles on Sunset Boulevard, and that was publicly funded. So far, that's the largest budget I've done. But I've had kind of little coups, all my life. But what happens when you're, with any of this kind of a job where it's not a really straight job and you don't, you're going to get a promotion or something like that. You kind of are like, you have something really wonderful happen, and then it'll fade and then you're not in fashion anymore or whatever. And so you have to just endure and keep walking forward and just have the confidence to know that somebody's going to like what you're doing. You know, there'll be another opportunity. There are tons of opportunities. You just have to figure out where they're at, how to apply to them. Teach yourself basically how to be a grant writer, which is, you know, what you're doing is you are, a lot of times they have a theme, and then you have to write a proposal why they should give it to you, of how my work would fit into that theme. And so that's changing all the time. It takes a lot of your time, you know, because you're basically starting from scratch each time because each call is going to be different. But I believe in tenacity, you know, really. And basically, in the last 4 years, my photography has gotten more attention. And so that's where I've been focused more lately. And I'm very grateful, you know. I'm grateful that I could do different things to make money. But a lot of this stuff's been in storage, too, for many, many years. Like the stuff that's in Los Angeles was photographed like 35 years ago. And I'm very grateful that you know, that stuff is being shown now. So, yeah. Did that answer your question?
It did.
Yeah. Just stick to it. It's like anything. You know, people go, it's hard to be an artist. You should be a dentist or something, you know. But I think it's hard being anything, you know. I mean, let's face it. You gotta, you know, you're gonna go to medical school or whatever. I mean, it's just. And the thing is, you guys, you really, the only way for all of us to like be at peace with ourselves and put peace out in the world is to really follow our hearts, right? Because I think in the big picture, everybody is here for a different reason. And I think that, you know, we all know what it is in our heart. Like there's something that's telling you like, oh, this isn't going to be right for me. Maybe right now it's going to be right for me, but I'm going to still keep that other idea in mind, you know? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, hi. Ron Johnson. I'm the LSUS.
Hi.
Thank you for sharing your art with us. It's
Thank
lovely.
you.
I see a kind of interesting theme of time
Uh-huh.
in the pictures that you're displaying with us and what you're talking about. Photography is kind of an instantaneous medium, but you're showing pictures that have been kind of hidden away for a really long time.
Yeah.
And you were talking earlier about how your gesture, your manner with your subject sometimes plays out slowly over time. And I'm interested to ask what you feel has changed in the time between the images that were taken in the 80s and now, and how perhaps the slowness that you talk about helps when you're dealing with real people in the world.
I think the way that I work, I think people find refreshing that I'm not. I think first, if you don't, I mean, and we call you and go like, oh, I'm going to come by and do a photo shoot, and I don't show up with like a ton of, like with an assistant and a ton of like luggage with, you know, different lenses and stuff in it and lights, and I think people are like is she for real or something? And then I think once we start engaging, people settle down and they realize like, oh, this is good. This is, you know, I feel like I'm going to be represented well. I'm really aware, like, I don't want people to think I'm going to take advantage of them or do anything weird like that. I don't know. I mean, I think the way that I photograph now is, I guess, pretty novel. I mean, but really, I'm very kind of living my own little world, and I forget. Like, I remember I was photographing in Egypt at one point, and I remember people were turning around looking at me, and I was being really quiet, but what they were hearing was the click, because my camera still goes as it things, and then they weren't annoyed, but they were curious, you know, like, what is that? What is she using? Instead of like the phones and the da-da-da-da-da. And I do say like 10 years ago, I felt like it was really weird to have a degree that I felt, all of a sudden I felt like photography was like over, because everybody has a camera, and the phone cameras are amazing. I mean, I have a friend that's going to be filming a film with an iPhone. That's their next thing that they want to do. So, but I feel like now it's adjusting. I think the world was going so fast, so fast. Maybe COVID had something to do with it, where everybody like stopped, and then people, I think, got recentered and thought, hey, I'm enjoying time with my family, with my friends, reconnecting with people on a real level instead of like always being, through a screen. I don't know, did I answer your question quite?
Well, I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I never went digital. I purposely didn't go there. So.
Were people more trusting in the 80s when you took pictures of them, do you think?
Maybe.
Were they more inclined to interact with you?
No, I think it's about the same. I think it just depends on who I'm hanging out with, That's it. Yeah. Hi.
Thanks. I've been enjoying these images.
Thank you.
For weeks now.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, it's really gorgeous stuff. I want to know if you could speak about, if you don't use digital media, then maybe there's not a comparison, but I just really appreciate that you have to have that like decisive moment.
Yeah.
You have to choose when you're taking that picture.
Yeah.
And you don't get to choose, I'll take 20 pictures of something and
Yeah.
I'll just say, well, I'll just keep them all.
Yeah.
And then maybe at some point you can go back and think, was that any good, and maybe choose one. So like, how does it, could you speak about sort of, I'm just looking at this picture of this girl back here behind you.
The onion?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, if you had taken 10 different versions of that with a cell phone camera and then gone back, and just could you describe like inside the process of working with your subject and that intimacy, or not being able to take 100 pictures in a minute?
Okay. So, just to remind people who probably haven't seen a film camera in a long time, you get in general, you get 36 pictures. So you don't, I can't go, because then my whole roll's gone, and then all this other action's going on, and I'm fumbling trying to reload my camera. So you do have to be economical about what you're photographing. I also, for the majorities, actually this one and probably 4 other ones in here have been edited. Everything else in general, and the way that I've always worked, is full frame. And what that means is as I'm looking at my subject matter, I'm composing. So I know later I'm not going to be doing cropping or anything. Like, this is the frame. I think learning how to draw at a young age taught me that. And for everybody who is a photographer, for me, when I was teaching, I made my students draw. It's imperative, because it teaches you how to look, it teaches you about lighting, especially when you're doing black and white. But it really teaches you how to frame your subject matter, so when it's deliberate, what I'm doing. The other thing is I usually will, because I'm always nervous about lighting situations, I will usually take 2 images at different exposures, and then I edit, because I'm like, okay, I know I've got that one, especially if it's, and I'll remember the super special shots, like the one back there with the beekeeper and that shaft of light. I came back to Dylan and I said, oh my God, today I was at the beekeeper and I just was about ready to leave, and a shaft of light came down and do you remember that? And I said, shaft of light came in right at that moment, which is the decisive moment, and I got that shot. And that was the one I left with, and I thought, that's it. I know it. I have it in my brain. I know it. And I don't know, you'll remember, it's like you'll remember which ones are the super special ones. The other thing I was going to say is, I don't know. I think let me think about that a second more. But let me take another question and I'll probably add to that. But yeah, I don't know. Okay, you, okay.
In your opening comments, you specifically mentioned Danny Lyon
Oh yeah,
and Larry Clark
yeah.
as two influences. Those two photographers got their first wave of fame by working in these marginalized groups.
Yeah.
And actually being a part of them.
Yeah.
Documenting from the inside.
Yeah.
I'm interested in knowing which of these cultural groups that are represented here, which ones have you spent the most time with and got the most culturally attuned to?
Well, I did a project, when I first moved to LA, I did this whole project on, I was hanging out with drag queens, because for me, being from Louisiana, it was like California Mardi Gras. It made total sense, it totally made sense to me that these people were dressed up. And so my friends would take me and the guys would dress me up too. I was like a little doll and I was socializing, and I have a series of drag queens. And so with that comment about Larry Clark and Danny Lyon, who for everybody who doesn't know them, Danny Lyon rode around with this motorcycle club, and then Larry Clark, he had I don't know how to say it, less than how would you say that? Less than
junkies.
Yeah, they were bad. They were not healthy people. Okay, so anyways, so my comment about was about those two photographers had more to do with my old work from like 35, 40 years ago. So and I had spent time hanging out. They were my friends, you know. Like I said, they would dress me up and we'd go out to clubs, and I always had my camera with me. The other stuff is, I haven't been photographing friends so much lately. I mean, the stuff from the 80s, from my early stuff, is over there. And then all this other stuff, like, you know, I spent the day, basically I've spent a day with everybody in here. That I've photographed. Like I intended to go for a couple, you know, for like an hour or something, and then I ended up doing the whole day with them. It went on for hours. So, yeah. So that's that. I think because I've grown more into the idea that I want to archive and document cultural things, and people from like the, you know, Library of Congress, like the, what's his name? Like Fonville Williams. Actually, he wasn't in the Library of Congress. But Fonville Williams was another photographer from like the 30s, I think, that was photographing in Louisiana, who actually had gone, he was living in Texas, and I think his dad was working on a bridge, and had come down south to like New Iberia or something to work on a bridge, and ended up buying a boat because there were no roads back then down there, and obviously there's no bridges because they were down there building bridges, and he got a camera. Also, his first camera was from right out of high school, and he started photographing the Cajun community. He would take his boat out and row into these communities and photograph them. So I've been influenced by his work because his whole idea was he fell in love with Louisiana and he wanted to archive Cajun culture. And and I'm sure you must know the Lomax recordings, you know them. And there is a father and son who also during the 30s went through Louisiana and they did field recordings of Cajun music. Their goal was to traditionally archive this music, and it was in conjunction with the Library of Congress. So if anybody does want to hear that music, we all own that, because we all own the Library of Congress, so you can look that music up and you can hear these old amazing songs. There were also some photographs that they had taken, even though that wasn't their work, but I had seen those, and I really thought, Louisiana is so rich and so unique in its culture that I really wanted to be part of continuing that tradition, I guess. And so I think that's how my focus now is more documenting and being a cultural archiver, Then before I was just hanging out with my friends, and I was like having fun and, woo. So, yeah, so. Did you have a question?
I was just kind of interested if there were other parts of the country that you explored too.
Well, because I've been in California so long, I do have that work is of friends and a lot of my girlfriends that were in their early 30s and 40s. I have pictures of them during their pregnancies. And I would spend a lot of time in a really musical community, and we were out in the country, so we would have to do kind of house parties to gather together. And we held music jams a lot, which is for me really common to Cajun culture. But I have a lot of images of my music friends back there, of us socializing together on a really, sweet level. And then just as I've driven back and forth, I'll take pictures. A lot of that stuff is landscape, though. And I do have to say, because I was a military brat, I was really blessed to have gotten to travel before I landed here. And that really instilled in me to try to go back to those places that I got to travel to. And I purposely got a job in a travel agency in my early 30s. And or actually mid-30s, and I got all these perks, so I photographed, and I purposely went to photograph, and I could do so cheaply, and I figured out a way to do that, So I have stuff from all over the world, to be honest, yeah. Yeah, is that it?
What's next for you? Is it more Louisiana photography? Is it something else, different medium?
Well, I did mention to you, and I mentioned to Sandy too, that I would really, I'm going to continue photographing Cajun culture and just Louisiana culture in general, but I specifically want to start a project called The Way We Worship, and I want to photograph just all kinds of sacred spaces where we go. Because I traveled so much, I would always go to wherever, whatever was the predominant religion of that country, and I would go in these spaces, and wherever they are, I just feel like those sacred spaces are just so cool, and so I would like to photograph that and compile all that together in one book, because I think it would be interesting. So, yeah. So does anybody else have any questions? I want to thank all of you so much for coming and supporting, and just I really appreciate everybody so much. I appreciate the friendships I've met and the time that I've got to spend with people, and I'm very, very grateful. So thank you.